All right, so welcome back to the Sam Sorbo Show. Again, if you're catching this show on mojo50.com, thanks so much for listening. If you tune into YouTube where it's in video, thank you so much for watching. And don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. And if you are catching this on locals.com, thanks already for joining me here. I hope you'll join the community. Sorbos.locals.com. Kevin and I have decided that we need a platform where we can form community and have discussions of truth and have fun. And to that end, I'll talk about, I was just over on the west coast of Florida, not the west coast, but the west coast of Florida. And I spoke at a couple of different tea parties. If you follow me on Instagram, you saw maybe a couple of my posts about that. First of all, it went exceedingly well. I talk about my book, which is right there, Words for Warriors. And by the way, yes, that title is a little bit of a stab. I don't want to say homage because it's not. It's a reference to Rules for Radicals, which was dedicated to the devil. My book is dedicated to the word. And so I talk a little bit about that. I talk about the culture that we're in today and the fact that we are living in fascistic times. It's not quite as bad as we've seen fascism get in the past, but it still is pretty bad. And we ought to be paying closer attention. And I'll say this here. One of the things that I want to impress upon people is this. When you have a child and you want that child to be protected, you want to protect the child, you say to the child, listen, don't ever get into a van with a stranger. Don't ever allow a stranger to grab you and put you in a car or something like that. The second crime scene is always worse than the first. And I want to impress upon people, we are living in the first crime scene. You have to understand that. Now, there's a lot more that in my speech I go into to unpack this, but you guys have known me for a while, I guess, right? So we can get right to the nitty gritty. There's a lot more, and yet it's pretty simple. The second crime scene is always worse than the first. You can understand the analogy for a child. This is the first crime scene because we are being lied to, and we are being forced to become complicit with those lies. And that is a danger to us. So we ought to pay attention and be careful. To that end, I want to talk to my next guest, who's written yet another book. This individual is tremendously prolific and has been writing and producing more content than you can throw a stick at. He's been around for quite a while. He used to be a leftist, and you're going to have to fix your camera there, David, for us. David Horowitz is joining me, and he's written a new book called The Enemy Within. No, that's not the new book.
Yes.
Oh, yes, it is. The Enemy Within. I feel like it's an homage to some of the other things you've written. You've written so much. And I'm talking, David, I started this segment of the show talking about the fact that the second crime scene is always worse than the first. And so if you think about Germany, they loaded people up onto boxcars. That was a crime because they took them from their homes for doing nothing wrong, absolutely nothing wrong, except that they changed the laws and made it illegal for them to be. And so that was the first crime. And these people, and not that I blame them, but they allowed themselves to be rounded up and put on the boxcars. And of course, the second crime scene is always worse than the first. And my contention is that we're living in the first crime scene right now.
We have a fascist regime in Washington. My book, The Enemy Within, The subtitle is How a Totalitarian Movement is Destroying America. And it's a movement I grew up in. My parents were card-carrying communists. I was one of the founders of the New Left. I edited its largest magazine, and I left it when I saw that the left progressives, they're not about justice or peace. They weren't even about being anti-war. They're about being anti-America. They hate it, I call it the hate America left. How do you know this? Well, the greatest victory of the left in the 60s was to drive America out of Vietnam, to force our withdrawal. The communists immediately came to power and proceeded to slaughter 2.5 million Indo-Chinese peasants, and there wasn't one single demonstration against that. And that showed me that what the left was. It's an evil force. We have a president now. One of the first things he said is that systemic racism touches every aspect of American life. That is a monstrous lie worthy of our enemies in Iran, China, and Russia. That's the kind of propaganda of our enemies. We do not have systemic racism in America. And how do I know that? Because in 1964, the Civil Rights Act specifically outlawed systemic racism and institutional racism. So, for example, if police departments were systemically racist, there would be massive lawsuits in the tens of millions of dollars area against them, because it would be illegal. There are no such giant lawsuits because there is no systemic racism. Yet the Democrat Party is committed to this really propaganda of an enemy. It's also a racist party. Identity politics is racism. It's open season on white people in this country. And of course, on any Black who happens to dissent from the reigning orthodoxy. I mean, if you had told me a few years ago that it would be, that anti-white racism would be not only casual, but taught in our schools, taught to our military, and that the New York Times and the Democrat Party would embrace a fraudulent idea that America was founded in 1619 rather than in 1776. I would have found that really hard to believe, but that's the case that we have now.
Well, they're working on furthering the false narrative, and that's one way to get it done. And unfortunately, so I just want to step back for a moment, because your big epiphany came after the Vietnam War. And growing up, what I learned about the Vietnam War was it was a bad war. The government didn't even deign to call it a war, even though it very clearly was a war. The draft was imposed, and then but at the same time, I looked at it and I said, clearly we were fighting evil people. So I knew that much. Now what I've sort of discovered is that the reason that people mobilized against that war, or the reason that people were mobilized against that war, because there were a lot of people who were duped into saying, yes, war is bad, we shouldn't be at war, war is bad, right? Which is absurd, because it's not necessarily a choice to be at war when somebody declares war against you. And set aside that wasn't exactly what happened in Vietnam. The idea was that the left came over to the United States and said, we need to fight the war in the US, and we're going to fight it using propaganda rather than guns and bullets. And so they mobilized
Well, they blew up a lot of things.
Useful idiots here
to
argue the case, even though really what they were fighting for was communism.
Yes, Jane Fonda actually said at the University of Michigan that if Americans understood communism, they would go down on their knees and pray for it to come to us. she's a airhead.
Well,
I never.
okay, hold on. You can't call her an airhead. She's not stupid. She's duped and or she's evil, because communism very clearly is evil. So we shouldn't be giving people a pass when they're that stupid about communism, because they're making a knowing choice. I mean, I had a very long conversation with a young woman who was a communist about Hang Nor. Hang was awarded the Oscar for his portrayal in The Killing Fields. He was Cambodian. He was actually a medical doctor trained in the south of France. And when he lived in Cambodia, he was forced to leave the city, go out and work on the communes in the fields, just like every other peasant. He had to pretend that he had no education, or they would have killed him. And his book talks about this whole evolution of what the Khmer Rouge did to Cambodia. They killed, I think, over 2/3 of the population of Cambodia was summarily executed or starved to death in Cambodia because of the evils of communism. And we go through all of that. And she finally says, yeah, but ideally, it's a great idea. It's a great system. If somebody refuses to be educated, you can't give them a pass and say they're stupid. They're willfully evil.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
You're responsible for your idiocy, I guess.
Yeah. And I said to her, communism would be great if people weren't selfish. How do you propose to resolve that problem?
That's the thing about the left. And my book, The Enemy Within. By the way, this is The Enemy Within. It's the Democrat Party.
There you go. Okay, sorry. Keep it up.
Yeah, it's the Democrat Party. They hate America. They've institution. Here, look, we had two incidents in the last week. One is a violent criminal named Daunte Wright. You wouldn't know that he was a violent criminal from reading the press.
No, you wouldn't.
A violent criminal. This was a really bad person. What he did was he went to a party, a house party that lasted late. And I guess he knew the hostess. And she, out of the kindness of her heart, allowed him and his male friend to spend the night there because it was so late. They got up in the morning and Daunte Wright grabbed this woman by the throat, put a gun to her head, and demanded her cash, which was something like $850. He was given a $100,000 bail. The way the media portrays it, it was a traffic stop. No, the traffic stop led to looking up this guy's identity.
Exactly.
$100,000 bail because he's a violent criminal. The most dangerous, one of the most dangerous encounters that police have is in traffic stops, because a car can conceal a lot of weapons. And in fact, a week before, a guy had been arrested, he stepped out of his car and then lunged back into the car, got a rifle and killed the cop. So this poor woman, Kim Potter, whom they're lynching, it's just, Black Lives Matter and all these leftists, it's a gigantic national lynch mob is what it is. First the verdict, and then the trial, and the punishment, and then
right. The trial. We just pass over the trial. What need do we have for trials anymore? In fact, I think it was Kathy Griffin who tweeted, "Hey, there's video. There's no need for a trial in the case of Derek Chauvin." This is very dangerous precedent that we may be setting at this point. And so, actually, to that end, David, I'm encouraging people to find alternative media. And part of the reason is because we know now that we cannot believe the press. I mean, this story is a great example of that. And yet, where do we get our information? And lately, we've started to go to alternative media sources to get all of our information, because we've come to the realization that when we turn on the quote news, we're not necessarily getting the news, we're getting opinion disguised as news. And so if we're getting opinion anyway, we might as well go to people who we respect for their opinions.
Actually, if it's the mainstream media, we're getting lies. It's not
right. Misrepresentations and lies. Listen, I want to talk to you. We're going to do another segment. I'm going to take a quick break here. But we are talking about the enemy within, which if you'll hold it up for the guests one more time on YouTube and let me see if I can do this. I'll just pin you for a moment. There you go. There's the book, How a Totalitarian Movement is Destroying America, The Enemy Within, by David Horowitz, who's my guest. I'm going to take a quick break here. The second half of this interview will be available at sorbos.locals.com inside our community. We do hope that you'll join us there, Kevin and I, Kevin and me, I should say, as a grammarian. And I'll be right back with David Horowitz. For those of you who are joining us over there. Hi there, Sam Sorbo here. Did you like that video? If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe. And also, if you want more great content, join me and Kevin over at sorbos.locals.com. Thanks. See you next time.